Hey everybody, so I'm actually going to do a live stream now. Haven't done one of these in a little while. Sorry that I've got kind of a screwy setup here. I have all this equipment, but I don't have one of those tripods, so I have an 11 millimeter lens, a very expensive 11 millimeter lens in the corner here. So, I'm on a little bit of a phantom kick today. This may not mean a lot to those of you that did not grow up in Toronto or Canada in general in the late 80s, early 1990s. And it will also mean something if you are from Buffalo, New York, or in one of the border cities on the New York border. Because a lot of people would, if sometimes it was actually faster and easier to go to Toronto if you were American to see the Phantom of the Opera because it was less of a drive to see it in Toronto than it was to see it at the Majestic in New York City. And I was just going through my stuff and I found my old Phantom of the Opera mug. I don't know if this is focusing. I can't really see. So if my eye lines are all screwed up, I just plugged this in because I kind of wanted to do this because this amused me quite a bit. So this is actually from 1986, which predates the Toronto production. The Toronto production of The Phantom of the Opera opened in 1989, and I was one of those weird kids that was actually quite interested in the production, and I ironically did not get to see it until 98. So I went to see it. I finally got to see it. I think, yeah, it was November 14th, 1998 at 2 p.m. That was the matinee that I saw. And I was going through all my stuff and I found this I found this cool cup and it's on my desk. This, by the way, is broken. This is they fixed this, I guess, in later iterations of this cup. This is the original one, and there was a bit of a design flaw. Now, what's supposed to happen with these cups, the original one, well, they're all supposed to do this, but basically what happened with this cup is that you would plug it in. You would basically have your coffee or your tea or whatever hot beverage, and it was black. And then this was supposed to be heat sensitive, so when you put a hot liquid in it, it would magically turn into a ghostly white and reveal the mask. And when you didn't have anything in it, it was black. And by the way, I have this camera on batteries, and I was too lazy to plug it in because I don't completely have a permanent setup yet for the camera in the corner, which I will. So if it turns off, you'll still hear me, but you won't see me. So we'll just, like I say, it's a home broadcast. Anyway, this one was broken. This one obviously got nuked. Somebody either put it in the microwave or in the dishwasher. So if you had to hand wash them, because if you put them in the dishwasher, then this would happen. So anyway, I guess that happened to this one, and I thought it was amusing. And one of the things that I remember is that it was everywhere. It was probably the first really big mainstream musical that Canada ever got. And so basically the marketing team went to town. Now Garth Drabinsky is not a very nice guy. He went to jail for basically, I guess, insider trading and accounting irregularities. And by all accounts, he was a slime ball. And he also, wasn't very nice with Rebecca Kane over the way that she was treated by some of the members of the cast, which is, so that was a whole big thing. But taking the sort of negatives away from it and just kind of going to the magic of the production, just because somebody is not very nice does not mean that they didn't do something that nobody else had done. It doesn't mean that they're fantastic people, but the one thing that was a big deal at the time was that we didn't have any big musicals like that here. That was a New York thing. If you wanted to see a big musical, you went to Broadway, or the West End, and that was really the long and the short of it. There weren't. I mean, there was plenty of. There were lots of symphonies, and there was a very good, like an opera company and that sort of stuff with the Canadian Opera Company and that sort of stuff. But there weren't really any mainstream. There was no on Toronto at that time. So the Phantom of the Opera was really the first mega commercial musical that really kind of broke through in Toronto. And so they had these commercials that were everywhere. And it was everywhere, everywhere from coast to coast. And my understanding is that the Toronto production was one of now Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber's favorite production. I say now because back then I don't even think he had been knighted yet. He wasn't a sir, but that was one of his favorite productions. And one of the things is that the Toronto production was, they really, really went nuts with the marketing on it, even more so in a lot of cases than they did with the London production. And it was always interesting because you would see these commercials. In fact, I still see commercials that were going well into the early 2000s advertising the London production, but they're actually using footage of Colm Wilkinson and Rebecca Kane from the Toronto production. Although, to be fair, Rebecca Kane was actually in the London production. She was the alternate Christine for a very long time. I think over Claire Moore, who was the alternate and then took over from Sarah Brightman. And then Rebecca Kane created the role of Christine here. But anyway, I'm going on a little bit. So one of the things that, if you're of a certain age, you remember these commercials. And I remember a lot of kids that I didn't know it was a lot of kids at the time, scared the daylights out of me. They would have this, and I still remember the numbers. So, Truth and Advertising, what was it? 416-472-2222. It was Phantom by Phone. And it was his voice. And it was like I say, the commercials were everywhere. It was, they had radio commercials and they were on all the radio stations, and they had TV commercials and they were on all the TV stations, and then they had the Phantom Mask with all the candles and everything. But the one thing I remember was his voice basically telling you to go and buy your tickets. And it was Phantom by Phone. But he had this really creepy, gravelly voice, and he was everywhere. And it was this sort of, by Phantom by Phone, 416-472-2222. The Toronto production of the Phantom of the Opera. And his voice was everywhere. But it struck me that a lot of people didn't know who this guy was. And you would think, well, you know what? You got to remember that the television industry, particularly in Canada, isn't that big, and in particular was not that big then. So you see the same kind of talent showing up on the same stuff all the time, and it's a fairly close-knit community. And I work in broadcasting now, right? I have a TV show on the air. I have Go Nitro and I do a lot of commercials. So I have run into and have worked with a lot of the people that I grew up watching. It's a very I don't want to say insular, but the same names kind of pop up, right? So it's not like this place that's full of people and you will never run into them. If you do wind up working in the industry, particularly if you're dealing with music, you will wind up in a situation where you wind up working with people that you watched when you were a kid. That's just the nature of a small industry. But I had no idea who did the commercials, and I kind of had a resurgence of it. And you know what I'm going to do? I don't know if it's going to create a copyright strike, but it should fall under fair use. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to YouTube and see if I can find one of these commercials, because if I can, then I can show you. Phantom of the Opera Toronto commercial. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of these. I have not actually routed any of these. Somebody actually posted one. So what I'm going to do, I'm doing this live because I'm just doing this as a little quickie here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take... I'm going to take this. Whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to take my alt here. And I probably, you know what? I probably should have set this up ahead of time. Windows display 2, display 3. Whoops. You know what? I'll keep it at display 2. I'm going to make another display. I didn't mean to make this so complicated. It's just a display capture. I need to make a display capture device so that you can see it, which should not be too hard. You know what? Window capture will do. I can live with this. There we go. And I can see it. So what I will do is I will make this full screen. Now what I don't know is if you can actually hear the audio, because I didn't test it beforehand. Because it's just sort of a quickie rant. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in another thing so that I can actually do this. There we go. All right, so I found the ad, and sorry if my eye lines are going all over the place. I have 3 monitors here, and it's a little hard to see. So this is one of the famous commercials in question. This is the Phantom by phone, and this, as I say, if you're Canadian or you grew up in Buffalo or Rochester or Syracuse or whatever, you would remember these commercials. So I'm just gonna go and adjust to this. Oops. There we go.
Discover one of the world's great legends. A new block of excellent seats are available now for my spectacular show. Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Phantom of the Opera. Now in its 8th record-breaking year at Toronto's Pantages Theatre. By Phantom by phone 416-872-2222.
Okay, so I got it wrong. It was 872. I thought it was 472. Okay. Maybe not that effective, but effective enough. So yeah, that's the commercial, and there were a whole bunch of these. There were tons of them, and I was wondering who ended up playing this guy. There were a lot of these commercials too. There were a ton of them. Like there were tons and tons and tons and tons and tons. This is the one
in Toronto.
There was one
There's
with candles. That's the one I
magic.
remember the most. And I know it's on here somewhere, but I don't. Somebody had actually done a. Wow.
Each night, a new of the.
This is actually
By
one of the
Phantom by phone,
Toronto. This is one of the Toronto ads, and this is interesting because this is actually some of the footage that I've seen used in the London, in the London ads. But this is actually from the Toronto production. So I'm actually gonna give a shout out to TheTapeKeeper, who I guess uploaded this clip.
Each night, the angel of music will sing for you. Grasp it, sense it, savor each sensation. A new block of excellent seats are available now for my spectacular show. The Phantom of the Opera at Toronto's Pantages Theatre. By Phantom by phone 416-8.
All right, so it looks like my battery on my camera has died, but that's okay. We'll just keep it on this. So yeah, so this is kind of interesting because this footage ended up being recycled quite a bit, and for that reason, it's it's interesting that the original production would wind up using footage from the Toronto production. You know what? I wonder if this battery is still good, because if it is, then I can just turn on the camera. I don't do this very much. Um, I do intend at some point to kind of set this up in sort of a more permanent way. And by the way, this one isn't quite as polished as a lot of the stuff I normally do because I just kind of thought it would be kind of fun to do this now. And I don't know if this battery has any juice. We shall soon find out. Nah, dead as a doorknob. I guess I could plug it in, but I don't feel like it. I don't feel like plugging it in right now. It's a bit of a production that I don't feel like contending with. What I will probably do is once I'm finished with this one, I probably will plug it in and then I'll do a quick on the fly one later. So yeah, I wonder if this phone number still works. I'm actually really curious what happens if I were to dial this number. Does this number actually still work? Does the number still work? You know what I'll do? I'll do a quick Google search and I will call it. If I can actually open it up, which apparently it's not letting me on this stupid phone. Does it still work? That might be a subsequent broadcast, I think. So yeah, so this is kind of interesting because these commercials, they ran everywhere. And I was curious for years and years and years who actually did them. And it turns out that the guy who did this voiceover, this call Phantom by phone 872-2222, was Graham Campbell. So I'm told. And he was the one that actually played Thénardier in the Toronto production of Les Miserables, which I think Mervish ended up doing that one. So I thought that was interesting that it took 20 years to figure that out. Now, sadly, he's passed away, and a lot of the original cast have been. I mean, he wasn't a cast member of the Phantom of the Opera, but a lot of these cast members have been sort of not displaced, but they've moved on, right? So I know Rebecca, she's doing a bunch of shows in the UK, and she just finished doing some shows, I think, in Belfast. And I mean, you move on. I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, I'm 37 years old now, and when The Phantom of the Opera came out in 1989, I would have been 4 or 5. And by the time I got to see it, it was 12. So she would have already been in her 20s, late 20s at that time. So that's a long time ago. But I thought it was interesting to see if I thought it was interesting to kind of see that sort of setup, in my personal opinion. But yeah, it's these commercials were everywhere, and one of the things that I remember is it scared the daylights out of me, and apparently it scared the daylights out of a lot of other people too. And it was, as I say, it was a big deal. The production was a huge deal in that just didn't have those kinds of shows here. I mean, as I say, we had a very good classical community. We had top rate ballets, we had top rate orchestras, we had top rate operatic talent, but we didn't actually have any of this kind of mega musical stuff. So the Phantom really was the first sort of mega musical that we got here that was ran permanently for a very long time. And it did run a long time. It ran a good 10 years. And the Phantom would have probably run for quite some time after that if it had, if not for the Livent stuff and all the illegal stuff that Garth Drabinsky did with all the shady, book cooking and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting because I remember I had actually gone to the Pantages years later, and I believe it was Jim Lavaway I was talking to, and he was in charge of a lot of the stuff at Mervish at the time. So Mervish had actually purchased the theater I don't know what it's called now. At the time, I can't remember if they'd renamed it the Cannon Theater or if it was the Ed Mirvish Theater then. I think it's the Ed Mirvish Theater now. But anyway, uh, we were gonna shoot. I think it was a TV commercial or something, and we needed a big sort of 1920s, 1930s style setting. And so I had gone to talk to Jim Lavaway at Mirvish to see if it might be possible to rent the theater for a day. And at the time, it was a pretty good price. It was, I think it was like $4,000 or $5,000 or whatever for the full day, which sounds like a lot, but if you consider everything that has to be running, it's actually not that much at all. Anyway, the production, we never ended up doing it. I can't remember what. I don't know if the client changed their mind or we ended up doing something. I mean, it was a long time ago. This was probably going 2006, 2007, something to that degree anyway. And uh, but yeah, I remember asking Jim. I said, "Hey, you guys took over the theater, and just out of curiosity, couldn't the Phantom have kept running?" Because I think at the time, I don't remember if it was 2006 or 2000. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but anyway, they were bringing Phantom back for limited engagements, and it was a touring production. So I don't know if it was like a Live Nation thing or something like that. But anyway, they would book. It wasn't a Mirvish production. They were renting the theater, and it was the touring production that was going on at the time. And Jim said, he said we looked at the numbers when we took everything over, and we'd considered keeping it. He said, but there were a couple of things at play. He said, one, all the original set pieces and the stuff, the infrastructure had already been ripped out. So all that stuff would have to be rebuilt. And he said, a lot of the recurring costs were really making it difficult to turn a profit. He said 10 years is a respectable run. He said, but even at that time, he said, there were nights where there was less than 50% audiences that were playing the show. And so it makes it really hard to be profitable. And because there's a lot of things, even though the sort of overall cost of the stuff that has to be built is not too bad, right? Because it's already been built. Like they spent, yes, many millions of dollars on the show, but once the sets and everything are built, they can kind of reset it every night. There are certain things that do recur, expenses that recur. One, the cast of Phantom is fairly large. A lot of Broadway and West End type shows have relatively small casts, right? So that you don't have to pay equity, wages for really large casts, right? Because you have to consider that in the cost of the ticket. And you have to consider that in the capacity, right? So if you're blowing like $50,000-$60,000 in payroll every single night and you're not filling a minimum amount of seats, you're literally not covering the costs that you need to cover in order to do the show. And so that was a consideration. So, and Phantom has some recurring costs that even if your $1 million sets and stuff are already paid for, there are certain things that still cost. So as an example, one of those things would be kerosene and consumables, pyrotechnics, right? So you have not like the pyrotechnician would be on staff, but you're using consumables, you're using explosives, you're using sparks, you're using kerosene, and they had lines that were running under the stage. So every time you have a production, you have to pay to keep having kerosene in huge tanks delivered to the theater and the pyrotechnics because they're used up every performance. So that's something that needs to be replenished and you have to pay for, right? It's like refueling a car. You have to keep buying those things because things blow up. Shit blows up in the production. There's a lot of stuff that's on fire. There's a lot of sparks. There's a lot of flash bangs. There's a lot of, things that burn up. There's a lot of pyro in the show, similar to rock concerts of the day. Like there's a lot of shit that goes boom in the Phantom of the Opera, and those are recurring costs. The other thing is the orchestra is actually fairly large for a live production. Most shows now, the orchestra is usually 14 or under, and you can augment that quite a bit with synthesizers. And a lot of shows don't even have a full symphonic score. It's almost as though when Rent came out, people decided that, oh wow, now we can still charge $100 a ticket, and we don't necessarily have to pay full orchestra, and we can make more of a profit. Although, in fairness, that sound for Rent works that way for a reason. You don't need to have an orchestra. It's a more urban show, and it wouldn't be appropriate. But anyway, it just meant that a bunch of producers decided that this was an excuse to make a bunch of crappy shows that had like one person on stage against a brick wall with some guy and a piano and still charge $100 a ticket. And even if the show sucked, and people would go, and I suppose to some degree they did. Anyway, um, but the orchestra for the Phantom, I believe, was about 27. If any of you out there are watching this, and you worked on the show or whatever, feel free to chime in the comments. I think it was 26 or 27 or something like that, which is a fairly large orchestra for Broadway. I mean, a decent sized symphonic orchestra is some 50 some odd people, not including a choir. But for a Broadway production where they're being paid every single night, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So you need to make sure that you have enough that you're actually, that you're actually generating a profit. That's really important, or at least be in the black to some degree. So so from that point of view, there's the point of view of the fan, which I have, but also from somebody that, although I don't work in theater, I work in television, right? So there's a lot of parables, right? There are things that cost a lot of money. So some shows cost more than others. When you have a show where you have a completely new setting every week, and if you're flying all over the place and you have a huge cast of, like, 50 people, I mean, that costs a lot of money, right? So you've got your actor, your AFTRA, SAG union scale for your actors, and you have a lot of expenses. Uh, but at the very least, when you're doing a television show or a movie or a commercial like we do here at Skycron, at least once you've spent that money, you've only spent that money once, because then you have a tape. Well, not a physical tape anymore, but, well, just for shits and giggles, we'll call it a tape. And you only have to deal with those expenses one time. Once the show's done, it's done, and then you can sell it and resell it and resell it and resell it and resell it to a number of different TV stations all over the place. So once it's done, and then you can generate profits. So once you've made your costs back, the rest of it's just beer money. Whereas with a live show, it by its very nature is live. So what that means is that, if you want a show to be running, you're not playing a tape. They're real people on stage, and they are doing the same show night after night. So the same things have to happen every night, and the actors have to go out and they have to put on their performance every single night. And the stage managers have to be there, and the technical people have to be there, and the sound people have to be there, and the musicians have to be there, and the dancers have to be there. You know what I mean? So these are all expenses that have to be reissued every single night. And so these are things that have to be considered when factoring in how long a show is going to run. And the Phantom is closing. The Phantom is closing in New York. Like, that ran longer, a little longer. Well, no, ran way longer. I think it opened in '88. I think the Phantom was the third, or the Toronto. I think the Toronto production was the third or the fourth permanent. Yes, Zero. My Siamese is pissed off because she Zero wants to come in here because she's not being given attention for once. She's always given attention. Both of my pets are unbelievably spoiled. Unbelievably spoiled. So, you know, it. What can I say? So yeah, I mean, these are things that need to be considered when you're dealing with these sorts of shows, right? It has to generate a profit or make enough to justify its existence because this shit ain't cheap. And so that's pretty much the long and the short of it. But yeah, it was interesting because everybody that grew up at that time knows that voice. That by phantom by phone 416 now 8722222. So that was Graham Campbell, the now Jay himself, in the Toronto production of. I seem to recall that he did a number of promos for the CBC. That was when people actually watched the CBC and Canadian television, and they were still making stuff that people actually wanted to watch, as opposed to the crap and garbage they're making now. Holy shit. You know, you know, I'm not going to rant about Canadian TV. Not in this broadcast. But yeah, it struck me that it was kind of neat, and I sort of was like, oh, hey, there's my cup. So, yeah, so Graham Campbell, the man of the hour, rest in peace. Yeah, so by phantom by phone 416-872-2222. You know what I might do? I might do this later on today. I might call that number and see. I might see if it actually goes anywhere. Anyway, so you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm actually going to plug in this camera so that way I'm a little more organized the next time I want to do one of these things. I have a nice wider lens on it so you can actually see me. And so yeah. Anyway, so if you enjoy the content that I have, please do subscribe. I'll probably do another one of these in a little bit. I think for now I'm going to have a little bit of lunch, actually. I just kind of wanted to get on and do this because it amused me. It amused me greatly. Yes, by phantom, by phone. So, anyway, have a good one, and I will be back in a little bit with some other completely and entirely pointless content for no apparent reason. Bye now.